Are you ready?
Let's go.
Now circling in the neutral zone.
Here's the pitch on the way. 36 yards for the win.
This.
Here comes a big chance. The shot
is
this the dagger.
The neutral zone.
This is as good as it gets.
The Neutral Zone is brought to you by the Ontario Para Network. Follow them online at onpara.ca.
Now, here's your host, two-time Paralympian, Brock Richardson.
What's going on? It's time for another edition of The Neutral Zone. I am indeed your host, Brock Richardson. Coming up on today's program, we will be joined by the women's wheelchair basketball Team Ontario head coach, Dylan Carter. He will be along to discuss the team and what the expectation is for the 2025 National Championships held in Durham, Ontario. And we're also going to be chatting a little bit about the Toronto Maple Leafs, because why not? What are the expectations for them? We don't know. We're going to discuss it as a roundtable. And we're also going to discuss the Women's World Curling Championship. I'm joined by Josh Watson and Claire Buchanan. Let's get into your headline.
Neutral Zone headlines.
Slovakia will be the host city for the first ever Women's Para Hockey World Championships. The tournament will have 6 teams competing: Canada, USA, Great Britain, Team World, and 2 new additions of Australia and Norway. This World Championships is a pivotal step towards their 2030 inclusion in the Paralympic Games.
The mixed doubles team of Mark Idison and Ida Forrest finished 5th in the World Championships. This was after a heartbreaking loss, 7-6 to Japan in the quarterfinals. But some positive news with this is that they have solidified their spot for Milan next winter. So even though the result wasn't ideal, we still congratulate them for getting their spot in the world.
Three-time Paralympian Jonathan Vermette has officially retired from the Canadian senior men's national wheelchair basketball team. Jonathan joined the senior men's national team in 2013, playing a key role in Canada's impressive 4th place finish at the 2024 Paris Paralympic Games, their best result in 12 years. We at the Neutral Zone congratulate Jonathan and wish him all the best in his retirement.
Feels like lately we've been talking about people retiring in parasports. I don't know whether this is a good thing or not, but it seems to be the movement as we get into another cycle of the Paralympics and whatnot. I think it's somewhat normal that you see Paralympians, Olympians kind of say at the end of a cycle, yes, I'm committed, or no, I'm not. So congratulations on a wonderful career. And we're going to have another retired athlete coming and joining us next week, Danielle Ellis, who played sitting volleyball for a number of years. And she put her volleyballs up and said, I'm done. So we're going to have that discussion. Josh is laughing at me because he's like, I wasn't sure where that was going. Yes, Josh, I did cover myself on that one carefully, but I got there. So yeah, we're going to have a great chat with her next week. Those are your headlines for this week. If you want to get a hold of us on social, here's how you can do that.
And welcome back to the Neutral Zone broadcast booth.
Play ball!
We're set to get this ball game underway. The first pitch is brought to you by Brock Richardson's X account at Neutral Zone BR.
Strike!
Pitch and a strike. Hey, gang, why not strike up a chat with Claire Buchanan from the Neutral Zone? Find her on X at Neutral Zone CB. There's a swing of the chopper out to second base, right at Claire as she picks up the ball, throws it over to the first base for a routine play.
Out!
And fans, there's nothing routine about connecting with Cam and Josh from the Neutral Zone at Neutral Zone Cam J and at J Watson 200. And the Neutral Zone is brought to you by the Ontario Para Network. Connect with them at ON Para Network. Follow them online at onpara.ca. Now that's a winning combination.
We are pleased to be joined by Ontario's women's wheelchair basketball head coach, Dylan Carter, to discuss how his team was selected and the expectation for the team headed into the 2025 Nationals held in Durham, Ontario. Welcome to the program, Dylan. Nice to have you along.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. Really appreciate the time.
Dylan, can you start off by telling us a little bit about how you became involved in wheelchair basketball?
So been about over 10 years now, almost 11 now, coming up in May. I got, like a lot of people in this country, I think I got suckered in. I say that tongue-in-cheek by Coach Mike Frogley, the world-renowned former gold medal Canadian men's head coach. And I started just volunteering, and volunteering turned into what was formerly known as the Academy in Toronto with kind of UTSC. It was started out as volunteering, turned into kind of a part-time job, turned into a full-time job straight out of university. So, here I am.
You, over the 10 years, have thrown your name into a handful of positions to evolve through the sport. And you've recently thrown your hat in to coach the women's program. What intrigued you about this role specifically?
I obviously being from Ontario, I like to think I'm a proud Ontarian. I know that's sometimes weird to say as provinces, but I think that's important. I just had some time to work with a lot of the local women throughout the club scene, and obviously at the training center and with the national team program. And I know they were looking for a new head coach, and I was looking for an opportunity for growth as well. And I think it's been a really pleasant experience for both parties and for all parties involved, and I've just really enjoyed it. So. Yeah.
Now, there's a lot to consider when constructing a team. Can you walk us through the selection process and how you came to have the team you do?
Yeah, no, for sure. As you said, there's a lot of different variables that you have to take into consideration when selecting a team. It's not always just the best players, but you're selecting a team, not the best players. It's not an all-star team, it's the best players. And so how do you fit? Obviously, with wheelchair basketball and the classification system, you can't just take a bunch of 4.5 players, which would be the highest classification, because couldn't field a lineup then. And we are very fortunate in Ontario that some of our best players are actually on the low point side. So some of our national team players and some of our young and upcoming players. So that wouldn't even be the case for me anyways. But I think the way we've selected the team, I've obviously been working really closely with my assistant coach, Senna Worley. She's a former Ontario junior player transitioning to be a coach, and she's been my assistant coach for the last 3 years. So everything I say is with her blessing as well. Hopefully, don't want to speak too much for her, but we work in tangent. We work in tangent together to come up with the best team that's hopefully will give us the most success. And again, we've had a lot of opportunities to train throughout the year, trying to do. We've done at least one camp every month, except for February since September. So having those opportunities to get girls from all across the provinces, trying to host them in some different places, so we can get some different girls, whether it's from it's down south as Windsor or up north as Ottawa. So just kind of making sure that we can get everyone involved. And then obviously we also have a couple girls, our younger girls, who are also playing down in the States in college. So, making sure that everybody has an opportunity to be a part of the program who expresses interest. And from there, it's just having those camps or sending in video and watching those videos, and just trying to, again, construct the best team possible to give us the best chance to be successful in the tournament.
Yeah, the next generation of female wheelchair basketball players, specifically in Ontario, is impressive. And you alluded to it, you have a handful of them playing collegiate ball
Mercy
right now.
And Rosie, yeah.
Yeah, so it just shows what is happening here in Ontario. And going into nationals this summer, what can you expect for this team at the tournament, but also what you're going to face against other teams comparatively as well?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'll answer that, but I just also want to speak to some of those younger girls real quickly, if you don't mind. But I actually just got off a call with Mercy and her coach down south, along with Jess McNally. We're just set up some more training for her as we see her. She's just watching. So she played this weekend in a tournament along with Rosie with Arizona. So they played some games this weekend down south, and my goodness, both of those players have just extremely been so impressive. And I think a lot of our those young next gen women that you talk about, I think a special shout out goes both to Kathy Ludwig for the work that she's done with the junior program, and then also a really special shout out to Chris Chandler, because I think a lot of those about half of the next generation athletes in Ontario, I think, can thank Chris Chandler for at least getting started, and as I use the word tongue-in-cheek, conned into the sport. To answer your other, sorry, I just want to make sure that those people got their flowers as well. But to answer your question, I think our expectation is we have kind of two goals. We're similar to last year's. We want to make sure that we have fun and that we compete. I think we really, obviously, I've just started. This is going to be my third nationals with the Ontario team. I coached a previous one before that with our mixed team. But when Ontario didn't send a team, so I had a lot of the Ontario girls there, but kind of unofficial. So really our third nationals as a team, and our first two nationals were really like, we want to talk about emphasis on growth and learning and fun. And I think but all two of those are also extremely important, and we're going to continue to be big emphasis about growth, learning and fun. But I think this year we're really kind of looking to add a little bit more of that compete piece in. And again, I think sometimes we have this tendency to see compete as a negative word, but to me, competition is fun. Like that is what's fun. We're there to, have fun, and to be competing is fun. So I think also while we want to emphasize the fun part and the learning part, I think we also want to destigmatize the idea of compete as being a negative term always, and understanding, obviously it can be if that's the only thing that you're emphasizing, but seeing the fun in competing and the learning and the ability to learn how to compete. So I think that would be our goal. Again, I don't like to say, we're just going to go win everything. It's a process, and we're going to go out there, we're going to have fun, we're going to learn, and we're going to compete.
Now, you did touch on it a little bit earlier, but training is obviously going to be very important, and obviously with players in different places and even different countries. I'm just curious, can you tell us a little bit about what the training schedule is like between now and the national tournament?
Yeah, again, as I touched on earlier, we've been having a camp every month, so I've been doing that. I know what you just said too, it's tough when you got people all over the province, or sometimes not even in the country, but making sure that we have those opportunities for them. Again, our assistant coach Sana has done a really good job, especially with a couple of our athletes who are a little bit further away, who can't necessarily attend every practice because of the distance, of making sure to keep them to keep them involved in some meetings, so to update them. And I've been doing that, again, just obviously meeting with Mercy and Rosie and things like that, those two athletes in the South. And each son has been doing a good job with meetings with some athletes who can't necessarily attend every practice, just to keep them involved and understand what we're doing while they're still training on their own, and emphasizing those things of training. But as a team, again, continuing to work on what we've been doing. Again, it's been a process, and we've really been building for the last couple of years, and we're really excited about that. So again, we have some more camps coming up, and just continuing to add piece by piece to what we've been working on.
Now, I think I'm going to get a similar answer with this next question, because you also have a role within the women's national program and laying these building blocks for not only this next generation, but the next quadrennial for the Paralympic Games and going into 2028. What does that look like, both in your role and how you're seeing that transition with the current players, and what that might look like come 2028?
Yeah, I think it's exciting. I think we did a really good job in Paris. It was a really tough quad with our women's team. It went through a lot of different kind of coaching changes, quite a bit of adversity, and our seniors women's team kind of has had I would say, somewhat unfair negative stigma towards them, and we've together as a team put in a lot of work to I think we defeated a little bit of that narrative by getting past the quarterfinals, and unfortunately we did lose in the bronze medal game. But I think we can really hold our head high after that and be proudful of what we accomplished in Paris, but really looking forward to what we have going forward, obviously through this next quadrennial. Obviously we're hosting World Championships in Ottawa, so Ontario plug there, some Ontario content, Canadian content here, but we're hosting World's Championships in next year in Ottawa, 2026, and then obviously 2028 in LA. I think again, continuing to build off that piece. But one of the big things that, again, Michelle, who's their current head coach, who I work with, one of the big things that we've been talking about is just, again, really emphasizing that next generation and building up that depth. And that's something that we would really like to have. I think one of the tough things that we've had on our women's team is in the last few years, we've never really had to make tough decisions on the national teams in terms of who's getting cut and who's not. And obviously, it's tough to make those decisions, but also as a coach, you like to have that. It's a good toughness to have, because that means there's a lot of really good players. And I think we're going to start to see that with some of these younger players coming up. So again, how we can kind of continue to build off that, and having a full 4 years. Obviously, Michelle came in really late into the, she started head coach 6 months out before Paris. So having more time to really build a full vision and plan going forwards with the current athletes that we already have, while including bringing up some of those more next generation girls. It's really exciting to see what we can accomplish. I'm really looking forward to Ottawa next year, and then 2028 in LA.
Dylan, as you brought up Kathy Ludwig, and it's actually timely because I'm going to be doing an interview with Kathy Ludwig, which will air in the coming weeks, as she's taking the junior team to a tournament at the beginning of April. And one of the questions I asked her that I relucted to put on yours, and I don't know why, but it's a fair question to ask, is what's the rubber stamp of a Dylan Ontario team? Like if I walk into a gym and I see, okay, there's Dylan's team, they're playing, what style do I see from a team that you put together?
Well, that's a great question. And believe me, don't worry, as a coach, you're pretty much just thinking on your feet always. So it's okay you didn't include it. I think to answer your question, I mean, not to sound like too much of a coach, but to go back to my hallmarks of making sure that we're competing and having fun, or the overall arching themes and goals. I like to make sure we're having fun. Like I like to think I'm a fun guy. People always joke that I'm always smiling all the time. So, but I usually am, but I like to make sure we're having fun, but I really do like to make sure we're competing. So, we're hustling, we're pushing our hardest, things like that. So those are the kind of those things. And when it comes to style of play, I mean, I really don't like to, I like to be flexible in terms of exactly tactics that we're doing. I really don't like to, I'm a type of coach, I don't like to fit a square into a round square peg into a round hole. I like to see what my athletes are and kind of build a team based off of that style. I think we have a lot of really quick players on our team and our Ontario women's team. So I think we are going to look to use that as an advantage and use our speed, whether it's on offense and defense, and kind of play in transition. So I think from a style of play standpoint, obviously overarching, we're going to compete and have fun. But I think when it comes to a little bit more of our tactical nature, I think we're going to be looking to play in that transition. So we're using our speed as an advantage, because I believe that's one of our biggest advantages that we have.
The thing that always fascinates me about coaches in sports is when they feel the need to call a timeout in a game, whether it's, we're down X number or we just need a break. Is it literally feel, or is it also seeing what's going on in the court? Do you have sort of a method that you go, now's the time I'm going to use one of my timeouts that are held, at a pretty high regard in wheelchair basketball, because there's only so many?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love these basketball questions. It's a great question. There's a couple rules I'd say. First and foremost, I would say Mike Frogley I remember one of the first times I ever coached a game, I had pretty much asked them this exact question after my first time ever head coaching a game. And he said something that stuck to me. And he said, if you think you need to call a timeout, then 90% of the time just call it, because if you don't, you're going to be wishing 2 possessions ago that you called it. 90% of the time you're going to be like, man, I really should have called it when I thought I should have called it. So yes, there's a little bit of that feeling piece to it. I think it's, to get a little bit more into the rules. So there, that's kind of the art of coaching. To get into a little bit more of the hard rules that I use kind of if it's in the first half, you call it no matter what. Like you don't need your timeouts as much in the first half. If something's going on, call it right away. As you do get into that second half, again, you have 3 timeouts, but you only can use 2 in the last 2 minutes. So obviously, if you use one right away in the third quarter, that's fine. But when you get down to those 2 timeouts, if it's a close game, obviously you do kind of want to be able to conserve those for, fouling, being able to drop plays, moving up the ball from the full court to the half court. So a little bit more strategic. So you do kind of maybe got to hold them a little, but I think that's where coaching really comes into the importance, when sometimes people talk about the importance of game coaching, but really that comes down to practice. Because if I do a good job of preparing my players, and not just me, my staff and the players themselves, and we do a good job of preparing ourselves, then when it comes down to it, I mean, like I think, at least for my philosophy, in an ideal setting, I can call 0 timeouts an entire game because my athletes can figure out everything on the floor. That means I've already done my job. So if I've done my job leading into the game, then I can call 0 timeouts, because even if something goes wrong or something happens, the athletes on the floor can make an adjustment, or even we can communicate that adjustment from us to the floor, whether that's through subs or through that, or just the athletes on the floor recognizing it. So I think that would be one of those rules. And then I also just have a rule with Sana, with my assistant coach. I always just have her every once in a while. I always think it's important to have your assistant coach there, just being like, hey, even just reminding you, you can call a timeout or something like that. Because sometimes as a head coach, you get a lot of things going. So as an assistant coach too, it's just always important to be a little bit. Sometimes you might get ignored. Again, I'm an assistant coach too. I know what that feels like. But it's just that friendly reminder. But yeah, I think those are kind of the things. The difference between, yes, to answer your question, kind of a little bit of the art and a little bit of strategy. But I will always say to any young coaches, again, what I always take from what I think about the most is what Mike Frogley told me, is just, if you're thinking you need to call a timeout, then just call it. Because if not, you're going to probably wish you did 2 or 3 possessions ago.
Fair. One last one for me, and you brought up your assistant coach a couple of times, and I want to highlight that because I love the fact that you brought her up, and it's not just I'm the head coach and that's it. I think it's done by committee, and I think you're right in suggesting that. Is there defined roles where you say this is your role on the bench during a game and this is my role, or is it again by the feel of the moment?
Well, I think obviously, again, so probably there's no 100% one. I don't think we live in a black and white world. I think a lot of things happens in the gray, but I think setting yourselves up to be successful means there has to be defined roles, because if you just let it go completely fluid, then again, I don't think that's going to have no different than on the court, right? Like, again, I'm not one to dictate everything to our players, but there are some things that, need to be kind of dictated to, and kind of a little bit of a structure. But yes, Sana and I definitely meet together, and we have some defined roles so that we can be successful for the girls and for ourselves. But again, I am very much a person where, at least my philosophy is, I very much, as you said, it's not, I don't believe in like a pure dictatorship. I'm very much by committee. And even when it comes to my players, like I have no issue, obviously Sana too, but if there's some of my players, whether it's a young or a veteran player, obviously, you do tend to listen to your veteran players they have a little bit more experience, so they might be a little more comfortable raising that. But really, if any of my players make a suggestion to me, I have no qualms of being like, hey, you know what? That's good. My only rule is I'm very much a by committee person. Having said that, when it comes down to it, I do think that's where the little bit of that dictatorship, I do think you need that one vision, or else we're all not going to be on the same page. So I always say it's like, at the end of the day, once we'll come to a decision as a committee, but what I says go at the end of the day. Like when we come to that final decision, we all need to be on that same page. But I'm very much not believing in whether it's Sana or, Mark, team captain Tamara or Mel. I mean, some of these people have had more experience in wheelchair basketball than I have, and at the end of the day, I'm just a coach. I'm not out there on the floor. If anyone has a suggestion, I'm always ears and always open to. I'm not that type of person. So again, it is very much a committee, but we do need to all be on the same page. So I think that is really what a head coach is. It's just not necessarily there to come up with all the ideas, but there to sort through them and at the end of the day, make that final decision.
Yeah, agree. Hear. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. We greatly appreciate it, and best of luck at the national championships. And we're going to be there, so we'll get to meet in person, and it will be enjoyable. But best of luck, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And yes, look forward to seeing you guys there. And don't be a stranger. Definitely come up and say hi. Obviously, I know Claire.
That was Dylan Carter, who is the head coach for the women's provincial team here in Ontario.
The Neutral Zone is sponsored by the Ontario Para Network. Their focus on the growth and development of wheelchair basketball, tennis, and rugby in Ontario.
One of the things that I absolutely love about this podcast in particular, and I know I'm a little bit biased because I host it and I, have done what I've done with the group. But one of the things that I love is that when we have the opportunity to have all headlines parasports, followed by parasport interview, and we just had that in the first relative half of the program, and it was really, really good. Claire, it seems to me that you've had some experience with Dylan based on what I think was a good relationship. And he said, I know you, as we ended the interview. So I'm just curious of your thoughts on the interview and Dylan and Team Ontario and his role with Team Canada. Give us your sense on Dylan.
Yeah, so when I returned from the States after playing ball, we were entering what at the time was the Wheelchair Basketball Academy here in Scarborough. And yeah, he literally started from volunteering. He's a big basketball fan. He's, as you can tell, knowledgeable in the wheelchair basketball world, but that's because he's put in his time and really learned the game and the players. But he's just he's a huge basketball fan through and through. Like, you can talk basketball with him all day long. And so he just started off rebounding basketballs for athletes, and then got into coaching roles and other opportunities. And now he has one of the most impressive and longer resumes here in Ontario with coaching. And it's nice that he gave people like Kathy their flowers, and it's because of those coaches that he knows so much, and he has such a good relationship with the athletes as well. And it's the people at the grassroots level don't get a lot of light shown on them. And Dylan, over the last 10 years, has worked his way up from working with kind of rec wheelchair basketball to all the way up to the women's national team now. And now you see him at Paralympic Games, and it's really cool because he's one of those guys that, yes, you can tell by his interview that he just brings a lot of energy to the game, and he loves what he does. And that's so important in a coaching role. So you see some coaches that just come in and aren't really fully in it. And I think he, right from the beginning, has been fully in it because he loves the game at all levels.
For me, I really gravitate towards his energy, his enthusiasm. I have seen some of the players that he's now working with, both the younger players and the older players, and I really appreciate the priorities I think he has. He's very knowledgeable about the game, as you said, and I think that's very important because we talk, especially on the para ice hockey side of things, about how we have these coaches, but do they really know the game? Well, Dylan clearly knows the game, so there's no issue there. I think what I took note of first and foremost was that his expectations seem to be reasonable. On the one hand, yes, he wants to compete and he wants to win. Obviously, that's why you're in that role. But he also talked about the fun aspect, and he wants his players to enjoy the game. I think too often when we get to high performance levels, it becomes either a job if we happen to be able to make some money at it, or it just becomes a grind. And to hear that a coach is emphasizing, like, let's have some fun, that to me is a great thing, because you're going to have players that are going to want to stay longer, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you just also develop the understanding of disability if you didn't already have it before. You would certainly have it over 10 years. And I think that that's where Dylan is setting himself apart. We didn't talk about what he knows specifically on disability, but you can just feel and hear that he loves his athletes, loves his players, loves his coaching staff. And I too also want to echo the fact that to give shout outs to Chris Chandler, to give shout outs to Kathy Ludwig is incredible. It's humble, and it's really good to give other coaches their due, because it's easy to say, I'm here now. I'm the Team Ontario head coach. I'm on the women's program. I've been to the Paralympic Games. For him to literally, in the middle of a question, be like, "Hold on, I want to give my flowers here." I'm all for that, and I love that, because he's right. It does start in the grassroots, and that's where Kathy Ludwig and Chris Chandler exist, in the grassroots side of things. And both of those two individuals I have on social media. One I have a far deeper relationship with than the other, but they are both the first to celebrate athlete successes at any level, whether you coach them at House League, whether you coach them with Team Ontario, whether you coach them, whatever you do coaching with them. They celebrate the successes of their athletes when they move up, because I don't care who you are. If you're a grassroots coach and you see athletes who are building towards that next level, that's where they get the payoff, and they say, in Kathy Ludwig's case, I can do this for 20 years with Team Ontario junior team by the time this cycle is finished. And she's okay with that. And that's why, because she sees the success and the watering of the seed that she's putting into it. So I loved it. I appreciated it. We're going to have Kathy on the program in the coming weeks. As I mentioned, I'm doing a one-on-one interview with her in the coming days as a pre-record. And I'll be honest, I'm being very selfish, because I want to do that one on my own, because I have had a 30-year relationship with Kathy, and knowing the success that she's had with these programs, I'm proud to call her a friend, but also a colleague within the game. So look forward to that interview in the coming weeks. It will be a good one, I promise. What is good, I guess, is watching the Toronto Maple Leafs. This season, they have been pretty steadily in a playoff position, relatively comfortable in a playoff position until recently, when they've sort of fallen a tad. We know that the team has had their GM, Brad Treliving. He came from the Calgary Flames. He's obviously made this team steadily better. They've gotten a new coach in Craig Berube, who's a Stanley Cup winner in his own right. Where's the expectation of this team tempering right now that as we record this, they're on a bit of a downward slide here? And I can't see a change with the GM. I can't see a change with the coach. But, what's the benchmark for this team when we get towards the playoffs? Let's start with Josh on this one.
For me, I think the benchmark is pretty simple. It has to be a long playoff run. It has to be. This core has been together for, I can't even tell you how many years now. And they have not gotten it done. Full stop. The goaltending is better than it's been in a long time, in my opinion. The defense is better than it's been in a long time, in my opinion. So it's time for this core of Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Riley, and I'll throw in Tavares, because he was supposed to come and be this leader, which didn't pan out, in my opinion. So it's time for them to get it done. There's no more excuses. There's no more, we had a bad goaltender, or, our defense was too old. No. We went out, we got you a prime defenseman in Carlo. We went out, we got you some toughness in Scott Lawton, who can, I guess, play the game better than a Ryan Reeves, who got sent down to the minors recently. There are no excuses left. I spoke to everybody through our group chat a little bit earlier in the month, or maybe even last week, and said, is it cup or bust? And I don't think it's cup or bust, but certainly a bowing out in the first round or second round to me is not acceptable. It's got to be a conference final or nothing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to start with, is at least conference finals with this group and the additions that they've brought in the last year or so, and recently with the trade deadline. We also, I think that seeding plays a big part into this. We somehow have had the pattern of being in that second or third playoff spot, and it hasn't panned out well for us. And I was really hoping that this past week we would get that win against Florida so that we could fight for that first spot in the conference. But seeding's going to play a big part, just to see who we end up playing first, and then what the path is to the Stanley Cup. I think we have to look at what the other teams are doing as well. And it's, as a fan that is living in Ontario, the thought of a opening series of Toronto versus Ottawa, and Ottawa being back in the playoffs after 17 years will be exciting. I know that I've had a ton of conversations over my years of the level of physicality and where fighting fits in within hockey, and watching games over the last little while, and especially I'm going to go back to that Florida game last week, was, Domi laid a big hit and he sent a message and all this, but he ended up in the box, and Florida's two of their goals ended up being power play goals. And that's, I think, comes with playoff experience, is playing at that high intensity level of being able to balance, okay, I'm going to come out and be a physical player and stand up for my team, but also you have to stay out of the box. Like we are a better team 5-on-5. That just shows our power play isn't consistent. It's been good at times, but I think that's going to be the big factor in my mind, is can we play a clean playoff run with staying out of the box and being able to utilize those players that we have? Because this might be their last year for some of those players wearing a Toronto Maple Leaf jersey. So who knows what that's going to look like after this run. But Yes, I want that top spot going into the playoffs, but I'm also really intrigued about a possible Toronto-Ottawa series.
I'll be honest, I look at this and I say, if they don't get the top spot, they're in big trouble. Because even if you come out of that first round playing a Tampa, Ottawa, possibly, if Ottawa can squeak there, it's going to be a bloodbath. No kidding. You need to get that top spot where you're going to play a wild card team, which also could be Ottawa, by the way. It could work out that you're going to play Ottawa as a wild card team anyway. But you need to almost stay away from the Floridas of the world, the Tampa Bays of the world, the Bostons in previous years. You have to stay away from those teams. You need to give yourself a chance at a more favorable matchup, because any matchup in our division is a scary matchup. And that's kind of where I land, because even, like I say, even if they get out of the first round, they're going to be so battered and bruised because it's an Atlantic Division opponent that it's like, okay, what do we have left? And as you point out, Claire, they're showing what they have left, and they aren't being able to control their emotions at times, and they're going into the box, and you're just like, man, like, why does this have to be this way? Or they're only like 30% on the power play lately, and it's like, that's not good with the horses you have, Josh. I mean, I'm not expecting them to be in the 80s and 90s, but certainly better than 30 some percent over the last 10 games. Like, that's brutal with the talent you have. Brutal.
Well, absolutely. There's no doubt that the team is struggling and has struggled to a point. I do think that physicality needs to be there, because otherwise we run into what we saw a number of years ago, where you have Austin Matthews behind the net being ragdolled, and just smiling at his opponent like, oh, this is fun. Like, I'm sorry, throw a punch. I understand we have different views on fighting and things like that, and that's okay. But you have to stand up for yourself. Maybe you don't start it, but you have to be able to finish it. And this core has not finished it. There's not enough toughness there, in my opinion. But
yeah,
I do agree that there's a limit. And Domi's move was not a good look. But it is what it is. As far as the divisional rounds and the matchups and things, a first round matchup against a Florida would be scary. I think even a first round matchup against an Ottawa could be scary, because Ottawa just is pesky. They have a way of hanging around. Linus Ullmark is an all-world goaltender at the moment. He's standing on his head, reaching across his crease to stab a puck that he had no business getting to. Like, that man has the ability to steal a game from his opponent. He really does. I personally think that Anthony Stolarz can do that for us. Not so convinced that Joseph Woll can, but I think you're going to see come playoff time that Anthony Stolarz is the starting goaltender of this team. He seems to be the stronger of the two, in my opinion. So it will be interesting to see what happens. I'm not convinced, based on the moves they made, that Boston thinks they are going to get in. I think that's why you saw Marchand traded to Florida, and you saw Carlo traded to Toronto. You saw Coyle traded to the Avalanche. They are clearly thinking about a retool, if not a rebuild, in Boston. So thankfully that ghost should be left in the closet. But there are other ghosts out there that just, I don't like the look of with this team. And to get back to what we were talking about off the top of the segment here, I don't see a change with the coach. I actually think Craig Berube has been very good for this team. He's brought a mindset that is, we're going to be hard to play against. We're going to be tough without being stupid. We're going to score goals. That is what we are going to be. And if you don't want to be that, don't bother me. Essentially, this is what it takes to win. Take it or leave it. And I like that attitude. I do. So it will be interesting to see what happens and see what the path will be.
Yeah, it might come off as like a cheesy comment, but the comment of we need to play a complete game is, I think, just what we need to have, and it be consistent, because I don't see where we have any doubt positionally wise. Obviously, our forwards are what they are, and we have high expectations out of them. We've brought on some defense that I think like completes, and there's no gaps there. And we finally have goalies that we can at least trust and give them a fighting chance, where we're not dealing with injuries and having to trade goalies because they're injured. And there just hasn't been this, I guess, chaotic feeling going into the playoffs of like, oh man, we're missing this on defense, or we're missing this in goaltending. And it's, if we can play a clean, complete game and stack those games on top of one another, no matter who we play. Yeah, I absolutely, with that style of play that we have within our head coach of being a tough team to play against, yeah, we can have a deep run, but it's all those things have to align.
It's about building habits.
Absolutely. For the first time in 30 plus years of me being a Leaf fan, because I've been a Leaf fan since I was born, I looked at the trade deadline and I was like, listen, they got both of those needs that we needed, which I cannot say that in years past. In years past, it's like, we got one, but we're missing one. This year, we got two, which is why you cannot put this on Brad Treliving, because Brad Treliving got both of those needs required. You cannot put this on Craig Berube, because for the vast majority of the season, this team has been in first place, and certainly within the top three for the majority of the season. You cannot put this on this team. Where you can put this is squarely on the players and say, you have the tools, go play. This is where coaches like Jesse would say, guys, or not Jesse, Dylan, excuse me, would say, guys, go play. We have the tools. Go do this. Do what I'm asking you to do, and we will be successful. The minute they strive away from what Craig Berube is saying, that's where the problem is going to be. But it isn't going to be what talent is there, because they've added the talent on the ice, and you cannot fault the organization for doing that. Because the thing, as we were talking, that the visual from last year's playoff that I can think of is Mitch Marner throwing a complete fit on the bench. If that happens with Craig Berube, Craig Berube is tapping him on the shoulder and goes, you sit, sir, for the rest of this game, because I'm not going to tolerate that. There hasn't been a coach that has done that, and I don't think Craig Berube is going to tolerate that, and I already think he's instilled that kind of thing in the team of, we're not going to do that this year. We're going to be hard to play, Claire.
Yeah, there's this image, and I can't remember what year it was from, but we had got kicked out of the playoffs, and immediately as the game ended, an opposing player just screamed right in front of our goalie's face. And it was one of those moments where it was a message sent to Toronto that we need to toughen up and not take that and stand up for our players and each other. And I think keeping that message is going to be successful for us. But I'm really glad that we're not focusing on like a 60 goal season for Austin Matthews, or there's this big other thing happening where it's taking away from the actual goal in mind of, we just need to win games. So I think that's a big contributor too, whereas maybe during that season there just was too much focus on something like that. So it's never one thing, right? It's got to be a bunch of things that are done well, and like Josh said, good habits and staying with them and not forgetting what your key messages and key points are that you want to stick through the entire playoffs.
Right. And I think to Brock's point about the Mitch Marner visual, which I think every Leaf fan has burned in their brains, and is why people would not be upset if Mitch Marner were rode out of town on a rail. I happen to think his teammates dealt with that pretty well, actually, because they basically, if I recall, looked at him and said, shut your mouth. Like, we don't need this right now. We don't need you acting like a big child on our bench. If you don't want to play, go home. And obviously, I think what we've seen is that Berube has set a new benchmark for, this is how you play the game. Anything else is not acceptable.
100%. It's going to be interesting. There is a few games left. They do have 2 games against the Florida Panthers left in the regular season, which are going to be massively important. They also have 1 game in hand, which they need to win. When Florida's not playing and you're playing, you need to take advantage of that, because Florida's a good team. Everybody in the Atlantic got better who's in the hunt for the playoffs. Every single team. So there is no pushover game in the Atlantic. We talked about who our picks were for the Stanley Cup for Canada. Some of us said Edmonton. Some of us said Winnipeg. I don't think any of us are expecting Toronto to be hoisting that Stanley Cup. But I do agree with both of you. It's gotta be the conference final. Like it's gotta be there. We've gotta be there. And you put yourself in a position to get there and now just finish the job. And to me, finishing the job is getting yourself into that top spot at the end of the season. I don't really care that you're in third place right now with 4 points behind. Just make up the ground as it's available to you, because there are still 4 points available to Florida when you're playing Florida. And if you don't win both of those games, you are in trouble. So that's our 2 cents on the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, but I think it's pretty well concluded that they're going to be in the playoffs. It's just a matter of what that matchup looks like coming down the road. And I also think if you're going to fall into that second or third spot, you must have home ice advantage. So you have to be in that second spot. You don't want to fall into that third spot where you're literally on the road to start every single series from beginning to end, because that will be tough. Because credit to the Leaf fans, they're actually fans right now in those stadiums. They're actually cheering on the team and doing the things that they did. For a lot of years it was, oh, it's so suit-like and there's no cheering and there's no this, there's no that. And sure, it still exists, Josh, but we are actually seeing that actual fandom come out in the games that can be heard on television, which is great.
Absolutely. The one thing this team has always needed is a fan base to be behind it. There has been talk for years about, oh, Toronto is the quietest barn in the league. Well, watch an Edmonton Oilers game, watch a Canucks game, watch a Winnipeg Jets game. Those fans get into those games. And I understand corporate sponsorship, and I understand that seats are expensive and only certain people are going to be able to afford them, but you've got to be a fan of the team. If you're just there to reward your clients for doing business with you and you're not actually in any kind of way interested in the game, why are you there? Pick another way. Buy yourself a box. Go have your business meeting in your box while the game is going on. That's fine. Don't take seats away from fans who are actually there to watch the game. And I think this year you're seeing that because the team is more interesting, more successful, maybe a little tougher, maybe a little rougher, that fans are getting into it. So we'll see what happens.
Speaking of a resilient team, we know now that the Women's World Curling Championships are happening overseas, and Rachel Holman and her team are where you would expect them to be 4 games in as we record this, only having 1 loss. And it was a loss that they kind of had some bad luck, to be perfectly honest with you, in the loss, but they also put themselves in that sort of situation. Josh, I am going to start with you again on this one, because you and I have had this conversation privately. It feels like Holman has had trouble reading the ice the first few games. She's come back around to it now, but I think she's not as spoiled with this ice as she is normally in Canada, and we saw that in the first part of the tournament.
I think you're absolutely right. The thing about curling in other parts of the world where it's maybe not as big a sport as it is here is that the ice making is not going to be the same caliber, unfortunately. And I know the World Curling Federation will do its best to have the best ice makers make the ice for these events, but it's just not going to be the same because the venues are not designed the same. They're not built for these kind of events. And so I think in the game against Scotland, where they did unfortunately lose, I think what you saw was a few bad breaks, but also just excuse me, a few misreads. And when you are missing your shots, you give your opponent an opportunity. And the team from Scotland is a very good team. Now they've bounced back and they've played well against Sweden and they've played well against Denmark, but when it comes right down to it, you have to beat the teams that you need to beat. So does that Scottish team come back to haunt them at some point? We'll have to see.
Claire, any particular thoughts on the women's worlds?
Well, I think we touched on this, I think last week or the week before, of the advantages and disadvantages of playing either on home soil, whatever that means for whatever sport. And yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of touches on what Josh said, is that it's going to be different when you're not on your home ice, and you know what it feels like, and you kind of can play strategy into it much easier than anywhere else. And yeah, that exactly is where they might end up, if anything, kind of having it come back and bite them is just the environment and not having home ice advantage. But you can never count out that woman. You know what I mean? You can never count her out. She's like, no. She will find a way. And she's one of those athletes that just, she makes it look so easy, but she also pulls out moments that just leave you in awe as well. So it'll be exciting to see where they land at the end of this.
I mean, there was they lost to Scotland and then they played Sweden and they were down 2-0 to Sweden after 2 ends. And I've been watching it on record because God bless where it is. It's in Korea, which is 13 hours ahead of us. And I'm not even attempting to try to stay up. I'm like, oh, no, I'll record it. I'll watch it the next day. And I'm going to do this, Josh, publicly because we talked about it before we did. I know I just ruined the last game for you against Denmark because you haven't seen it yet. And that's the sort of crappy way about things being in the parts of the world. They are going to get into situations where they'll play at 1 a.m. and then 8 p.m. Eastern for basically the rest of the tournament, which is great, but it makes it hard to analyze situations when it's so much different. And because of that, the time difference is also something to adjust to for the athletes. I don't care how much prep time you do prior. I don't care what you do. You're actually in the grind and you're there and you're down 2-0 to Sweden, which is coming full circle to my point. You could have very easily folded the tent and said, we're losing this one too. And that team did not do that. That team said, no, we're okay. We're down 2. It's fine. We're going to roll through this. And they rolled through it comfortably at the end of it, to the point that they were up by 6, I think it was. And then it kind of scaled back. But I was never nervous in a situation like that because I'm like, Homan is not giving up a 5-6 point lead. Yes, it got closer, but she ain't giving up a 5-6 point lead, Claire. It's not happening.
Yeah, I don't have much else to say. It's not happening. Yeah, that just doesn't exist in that woman's world. So it's hard to put your money against her in any situation.
Yeah, it's really remarkable what she's managed to accomplish. And I don't see any way that she's not at least in the final. And if she doesn't win this event, I will be shocked.
So what you've seen then doesn't change your mind? You think she's figuring it out as we go, and
her very first game on brand new ice that she's never seen before, she beat a team in 6 ends. Granted, it's a team from Lithuania where there's 50 people in the entire country that play the sport, but still. After 6 ends, they walked up to her team and said, "Thank you. We're gonna concede here. We're down by 8." So she's beating the teams she's supposed to beat. I think the Scotland game just got away from her a little bit. I don't see that happening again. I think they learned from that mistake. And I think it was a mistake. I think they realized, like, oh, if we had read this a little better and read that a little better, we'd have been fine here. And I mean, Anna Hasselberg from Sweden has been a skip and has had a rink at World Championships for I don't even know how many years. But like, she's a household name to most people that know curling. So to come back and beat her after losing to Scotland, who I didn't recognize the team, that tells me something. It tells me you've got a book on those teams that have been there before, and you know what to do. And that's all you need.
They were that Sweden game. They were missing the wrong way. Like they always talk about, if you're gonna miss, you miss this way. They were missing the not good way, where Rachel's like, okay, you give me 3, I'll take 3. You give me 4, I'll take 4. You give me 5, I'll take. Like she was taking points everywhere because she said, "You're gonna give it to me. I'm gonna take it." Now, if there is a rematch, I expect Anna Hasselberg to be better than she was in this game, because again, I think that was partially ice reading. I think her third was having a huge struggle in that game, and she was the low percentage. She was in the high 60s when it was all said and done, and that's a problem at the World Championships when you're in the high 60s. Now, if I did any of my career in the high 60s, I would have been thrilled. But like that doesn't happen in curling, and you just can't expect it. So it's gonna be good. We're still only a quarter of the way through the round robin, but I don't think any of us are betting against Rachel. The point that I want to make is it's very, very important to be part of the top 2 after this 12-game round robin is done. Why I say that is because if you're part of the top 2, you automatically go to the semifinal and you skip that quarterfinal matchup, which can be deadly because in curling, it's a one and done. You lose one of those games, you're done. I mean, I feel terrible for the wheelchair curlers this week who had an undefeated round robin and lost by 1 point against Japan. There should have been something to reward an undefeated team. There's no business in a scenario where a team can come and beat them 7-6 and they're done out of the event. That is absolutely heartbreaking. So I think there should be some changes in the wheelchair curling format, because that is a crime against humanity that happened to that team. That is the end of our program for this week. I would like to thank Claire Buchanan, Josh Watson. I'd also like to thank our technical producer, Mark Aflalo. Stay tuned for next week, because you just never know what happens when you enter the neutral zone. Be safe, be well.
The Neutral Zone is brought to you by the Ontario Para Network. Connect with them at ON Para Network. Follow them online at onpara.ca. Now that's a winning combination.